Welcome to Dark Reddit, your late-night escape into eerie calm. I'm Alex, your voice in the dark and your guide through the unknown. This is Podcast 8, a shadowy chapter in our ever-growing collection of sleepless nights. Tonight's journey spans 1 hour and 2 minutes, a series of chilling tales whispered into your ears softly, slowly, designed to help your mind drift while the darkness unfolds around you. Before we begin, find a quiet, comfortable place to rest. Dim the lights, silence your world, and take one slow, steady breath. Now, close your eyes. Every story in tonight's episode is new, uncharted, untold, and unearthed from the darker corners of Reddit. Tales of strangers, shadows, and things that don't always stay in the past. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. You don't need to watch. You only need to listen. You're safe here. Now, let the night begin. I started working at this store when I was 16, and I just left last week. I'll be turning 24 by the end of this month. After nearly 8 years there, I figured it's finally safe to share what I experienced. From the very beginning, my coworkers talked about the place being haunted. They'd tell stories about things falling off shelves, warehouse equipment vanishing, voices when no one was around, and seeing figures out of the corner of your eye. I always thought it was just typical workplace gossip, stuff to make the slow shifts feel more exciting. And for the first 4 years, I didn't experience much myself, aside from some flickering lights or things toppling over now and then. I chalked it up to old wiring or minor vibrations. But then 2020 hit. It was early in the pandemic when something serious happened. An elderly man collapsed in aisle 2, the alcohol and soft drink section, from what we later learned was a heart attack. One of our deputy managers, Josh, rushed over and started giving CPR, trying everything he could. We pulled up bed sheets to block the view from customers and evacuated the store. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but when they saw the man, they told Josh to stop. The man had passed away instantly. Shook all of us. Management decided to close the store for a few days. The next day, Friday, the store manager went in alone to tidy up and prep for Monday's reopening. But when we returned that Monday, something was off. Half the shop was flooded. Every bottle of alcohol and soft drink in aisle 2 had burst. Just exploded. We checked the CCTV. 1 minute the aisle was completely normal. The next, bottles just began bursting. Row after row, with no one in the store, no temperature spike, no explanation. We tried to rationalize it. Faulty batch? Pressure? But all in that one aisle, the one where someone had just died? It didn't sit right. Josh never came back to work after that. He handed in his resignation the day we reopened. I can't blame him. Things stayed quiet for a while, but then in early 2021, we underwent a massive refurbishment. The store expanded into the neighboring empty unit, doubling in size. Our entrance moved, our layout changed, and most importantly, the old aisle 2 became aisle 27, the new toy aisle. Yeah, they turned the aisle where the man died into the toy section. Go figure. That's when the weird stuff really picked up. Toys would randomly activate, laughing, talking, or playing music on their own. They'd fall from shelves even when no one was near. Sometimes they'd go missing, only to reappear in strange places. like storage rooms or behind stacked boxes. One day, Sharon, who managed the toy aisle, was working alone on that side of the store when she screamed. We rushed over, and she was visibly shaken. She said she felt cold breaths on her neck and a grip, like someone had grabbed her shoulder hard. She showed us later in the bathroom. There was a deep red mark, like actual finger imprints. Then came my most disturbing experience. It was just a few months ago, near the end of my time there. It was around 11 p.m., and I was the last one in the store. We'd closed an hour earlier, and I was prepping the warehouse for the next day's stock. I had my headphones in, music up, and I was just moving pallets like usual. Now, the warehouse is always cold. All concrete, no insulation. But this night, I felt something different. A breath, not just cold air. Something warm, short, and human. On my neck. Then I heard a tapping on the shutter door from outside. We're in the middle of an industrial estate. No foot traffic, especially not at midnight. I went into the manager's office to check the cameras. Nothing. No one outside. I brushed it off and went back to work. Music turned up to ignore the tapping. That's when I felt it. A sudden gust of wind hit my back. I turned around. The shutter door, the one that can only be opened with a special key, which I had in my pocket, was halfway open. I froze. No alarm went off. No one could have opened it. I ran to the door, stuck my head outside. Nothing, just darkness. I quickly used the key to shut it and locked it again. Curious and now freaked out, I ran back to the office to check the footage. That's when I saw it. There's a light outside the warehouse doors. It casts a pretty clear shadow when someone stands under it. In the footage, I could see me step outside to look around. But there was also someone else. A black figure, standing directly in front of me. It had no defined shape, just a tall, shadowy silhouette, maybe a little hunched. I hadn't seen it in person, but it was there on the footage. And as soon as I shut the shutter, the figure disappeared from the camera feed. That was the final straw. I grabbed my stuff, closed the store early, and sent the video to the work group chat. Everyone freaked out. No one could explain it. And after that, I refused to ever lock up alone again. Unfortunately, since I left the job, I've been removed from the group chat and don't have access to the video anymore. But I've messaged my mate who still works there, and if he sends me the footage, I'll post it in the comments. Even now, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. After all those years of skepticism, I guess it just took one moment or maybe one ghost to change my mind for good. I've always been the one in our relationship who loves supernatural horror, movies, books, shows, you name it. My wife, on the other hand, steers clear of it all. She used to tell me, if you'd experienced the things I've seen, you wouldn't be so entertained by it. I used to tease her about her secret third eye, brushing it off as nothing serious. That all changed a few years ago. We were at my mom's house just hanging out. My wife, my 12-year-old sister, and me, sitting downstairs in the living room. At one point, my wife went upstairs to grab her phone from the bedroom. A few minutes later, she came back down, and I could tell right away that something was wrong. She was breathing heavily, visibly shaken, and trying her best not to cry. But she said nothing at the time, just sat beside me, quiet. Later that night, when we were alone, she finally told me what had happened. She said that as she was coming down the stairs, she glanced into my mom's bedroom and saw a little girl standing there, clear as day. My wife said the girl looked to be about 7 or 8 years old, wearing older style clothes, and what really struck her, what made her freeze, was the look on the girl's face. She looked surprised, almost like she couldn't believe my wife could see her. They just stared at each other. No movement, no blinking, just a 15-second stillness that felt like a lifetime. And then the girl disappeared. My wife didn't mention it to my mom or sister at the time. She didn't want to freak them out, especially since they had to live there. But the next day, I urged her to tell my mom. I knew my wife. She's the most grounded person I know, and she doesn't make things up or exaggerate. If she saw something, she saw it. So she told my mom, described the girl, what she looked like, how old she seemed, the way she stood in the room. My mom froze, then her face collapsed and she started crying, hysterically. When she could finally speak, she said quietly, "That's my sister. Name." I was stunned. I had never heard much about this. She explained that when she was 10 years old, her 8-year-old sister had drowned. There were no pictures of her around. My wife had never heard this story before. I hadn't even heard all the details, and yet everything matched. Every single detail. My mom told us that in the summer of 1974, her little sister had gone to the beach with some neighbors. This was the 70s, so it wasn't uncommon for kids to tag along with trusted families. The group included a 12-year-old boy from the neighborhood. Apparently, there was some sort of fight between the boy and my aunt over a crab. Hours later, when the group was ready to leave, no one could find her. They asked the boy where he last saw her. He pointed to a spot in the water. That's where they found her body. My mom believes, and has always believed, that the boy murdered her sister. She said he had a cruel streak, that he always gave off a bad energy. She's convinced the neighbors covered it up because the boy was family. And to this day, she still blames herself. She hadn't been able to go that day for some reason. She believes if she'd gone, she could have protected her. It was heartbreaking and terrifying, and the fact that my wife, who had no knowledge of any of this, saw her and described her perfectly, sent chills through every part of me. But there's more. When I was a kid, around 6 or 7 until I was about 9, I used to have this recurring experience that I've never been able to explain. I'd wake up at night completely paralyzed. My eyes would be wide open, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. Felt like someone was strangling me. It always happened when I was alone, never when someone else was in the room. It got so frequent that I began to expect it, waiting for those terrifying 20 or 30 seconds to pass so I could finally breathe again. I hadn't thought much of it in years. I always figured it was some kind of night terror or sleep paralysis. But after the incident with my wife and what she saw, I told her about it. She just stared at me, and then softly, she said, "Maybe that was her. Maybe she was trying to tell you what really happened to her. She thinks the boy strangled her before holding her underwater. And maybe, just maybe, her spirit had been trying to communicate that to me all those years ago. I don't know what I believe. I just know that ever since that moment, I stopped joking about ghosts, spirits, or people who say they've seen things. Because now I believe them. I believe my mom. I believe my wife. And I believe that little girl, my aunt, has never truly left that house. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my dad decided to go through some of his old stuff. He's the sentimental type, always keeping things for just in case or memory's sake. That day, he brought down a shoebox filled with random gadgets, old receipts, charger cords for phones long extinct, and, at the bottom, his old Nokia 6300. "Still works," he said with a grin, plugging it into a power strip. The little screen lit up with that classic retro glow. To our surprise, it booted up like nothing had happened. No password, no security, just simplicity. It had been years since he last used it. He'd switched to an iPhone in 2011, so this thing had been sitting in a drawer since then, untouched. We started going through it just for fun, scrolling through contacts, messages, and then the photos. Most of them were random snapshots. Pictures of me and my siblings as kids, blurry BBQs, a vacation to the lake. But then we came across one photo, a photo that stopped us cold. It was buried deep in the gallery, dated August 17th, 2009. My dad squinted at the tiny screen, puzzled. "What is this?" he muttered. It looked dark, black almost, the kind of picture that happens when you accidentally hit the shutter while the phone's in your pocket. But something about it made us curious. Dad uploaded it to his iPhone so we could see it better and turned the brightness all the way up. And that's when we saw it. At first, it was hard to make out, just a faint outline. But the more we looked, the clearer it became. The photo was taken in what looked like a hallway, not a place any of us recognized, and certainly not our house. The walls were a strange, pale green, cracked and worn, almost hospital-like. There was a window at the far end, casting a dim, eerie light through thin curtains. But it wasn't the hallway that chilled us. It was the figure. Standing just off-center in the photo, barely illuminated, was a person, or something that looked like a person. It stood facing the camera directly, half-shadowed. The face was pale and strangely long, the features twisted like a bad dream. The eyes, God, the eyes were the most horrifying part. Completely black. No whites. Just empty sockets like hollow pits staring into the lens. And at the bottom of the image, barely visible, written in what looked like a finger dragged across a dusty surface, were the words, "Help me." We were all silent, staring. No one said anything for a long time. Then my mom, trying to bring some logic into the room, said maybe it was a glitch or an accidental double exposure. But my dad shook his head. "I've never been in a hallway like that, and I definitely didn't take this photo. We thought maybe someone else had used the phone. Maybe one of us kids? But in 2009, I was only 10, and I would have remembered playing with my dad's phone, especially if I'd taken something like that." So we checked the metadata, but it only confirmed what we already knew. The date was right. The photo was taken with that Nokia, and it had never been sent or shared. It was just there, hidden, waiting. I became obsessed with it. I reversed the contrast, ran it through filters, sharpened it. The figure stayed the same, still twisted, still staring. Some shadows around the feet made it look like it wasn't quite touching the floor. A few days later, I showed it to my best friend, who's into photography and paranormal stuff. He stared at it for a long time and said something that sent chills through me. "That's not a glitch. That's not compression. That thing's in the picture. Whatever it is, it was there." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow eyes staring at me. I kept thinking about the words, "Help me." Was it a cry from someone trapped? Someone in danger? Or something pretending to be? A week passed before anything else happened. That's when I started waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night. Not 3:15, not 3:20, always 3:17. Every time, my room would feel ice cold. Even in the middle of summer, I would hear faint sounds like scratching on the walls or soft whispers I couldn't quite make out. One night, I sat up, wide awake, and saw that my closet door was open. I never leave it open. The next morning, I found a piece of paper tucked under my door. It was blank, except for a faint, smeared fingerprint in the corner. I asked my family if they were messing with me. Everyone denied it. My dad even got angry, thinking I was trying to scare my younger sister. Then something even weirder happened. My dad's phone stopped working again, just shut off and wouldn't turn back on, even when plugged in. And when we tried to upload the photo to the cloud to keep a backup, it failed. Every time, corrupted file. Even when we tried screenshotting it, the image would come out black. It was like the photo didn't want to leave the phone. Eventually, we printed it directly from his iPhone, just to have a physical copy. But that photo didn't last. A week later, it started to fade, like something was slowly erasing it. The figure was the first thing to disappear, and the words were the last. Now it's just a photo of a hallway. Empty. We still have it. Framed, actually. A kind of morbid conversation piece. My mom wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't let it go. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself staring at it for too long, wondering if something is still there. Watching. Waiting. I don't know who or what was in that hallway. I don't know who wrote, "Help me," or why that photo ended up buried in my dad's Nokia. All I know is this: some photos capture more than just moments. Some photos hold things that shouldn't be seen, and some things don't want to be forgotten. It was I was a registered nurse for 42 years, with 17 of those years spent in hospice care, and 5 of those working inpatient pediatric hospice. We cared for terminally ill children from newborns up to 17-year-olds in a 10-bed facility. It was some of the most meaningful and heartbreaking work of my life. Out of all the families and moments I was honored to be part of, one story has stayed with me more than any other, for its love, its grief, and something else, something beyond understanding. Back in the early 1990s, I was working in an AIDS inpatient unit. Back then, treatment was scarce and a diagnosis was nearly always a death sentence. One of our patients was a lovely young mother. She had unknowingly passed the disease to her husband and their 1.5-year-old son. The couple had another child, a 5-year-old daughter, who, by what we thought at the time, had tested negative. She was supposed to be the one member of the family who would survive. The mother was incredibly sick, but she was devoted to her daughter. Despite her suffering, she wanted to make memories. Moments her daughter could carry with her into a life that would soon no longer include her mother, father, or little brother. She was a saint, truly. I had to give her significant medication just to keep the nausea at bay so that she could sit up each afternoon and eat dinner with her daughter when she got home from school. That mother passed away not long after. Then the little boy, then the father. One by one, they all left this world, and the little girl went to live with her grandmother. Our AIDS unit eventually closed due to lack of funding, and I moved on to work in pediatric hospice. Years passed. One evening on the night shift, I was told we had admitted a new patient, a little girl with AIDS. I hadn't even seen her yet, but my mind immediately drifted back to that family from so many years before. Couldn't be. When I entered the room, my heart nearly stopped. Sitting at the bedside was the same grandmother, and lying in the bed was the little girl, older now but still recognizable. The girl we all believed had been HIV negative had, in fact, seroconverted years later. Testing was still in its infancy back then, and false negatives weren't uncommon. She had grown up, only to end up in our care, following the same tragic path as the rest of her family. That night, something extraordinary happened. The little girl looked at me and said, "Can you let Oscar in?" I glanced at the grandmother, who seemed just as confused. "Oscar?" I asked. "My cat," she said softly. "He's waiting by the glass door." Her grandmother looked at me and shook her head. "We don't have a cat." But the girl insisted, so I walked over and opened the sliding glass door. To this day, I don't know how to explain it, but the moment I slid that door open, a sleek black cat stepped in like it had been waiting. It jumped onto the bed and curled up beside the little girl. She smiled and stroked him gently, whispering something in his ear. The grandmother and I exchanged looks, half disbelief, half awe. From that night on, Oscar came every night. He arrived shortly after sunset, walked in through the same door, leapt onto the bed, and curled up beside her. In the mornings, he was gone. No one ever saw where he came from. No one ever saw him leave. And the facility? We were in a fully enclosed, locked pediatric unit. There was no way in except through security. Still, we let him come. It was hospice, after all. He brought her comfort. That's all that mattered. I started talking to Oscar casually at first, but there was something about him, something ancient and wise in his gaze. One night, as he sat perched beside her pillow, I whispered, "You're not a real cat, are you?" He stared back at me with those deep golden eyes, and for a split second, I truly felt I was in the presence of something holy. Not scary, not strange, just pure, unconditional love. I've seen a lot in my time, but nothing ever made me feel quite like that cat did. He wasn't just a companion, he was a guardian, a spiritual being, maybe an angel, maybe her mother, maybe both. The night the little girl passed, it was quiet, peaceful. She slipped away shortly after midnight. Oscar stayed with her only a few minutes after her last breath. Then he stood, stretched, jumped down, and walked out the door. He never came back. We never saw him again. I've had many profound experiences as a hospice RN, but I was present for all 4 members of that family, on each of the days they died. I don't know why that was, but I've always felt honored by it. To walk beside them, even briefly, as they left this world. That family changed me. That mother, so strong, so full of love, taught me more than any textbook ever could. The love they all shared, the grief, the silent comfort of a black cat who may not have been a cat at all. It shaped the nurse I became for the rest of my career. It's been over 30 years now, and I still think about them every day. I'm retired now, and I tell the story because I want people to know that love transcends, that the spirit endures. And when my time comes, when it's my turn to take that journey, I hope I have an Oscar waiting at my door too. I was a registered For some context, my son is 6 years old and on the autism spectrum. He's a bright, unique, and deeply sensitive child who often experiences the world in ways others might not understand. but he has never heard the story I'm about to share. In fact, no one in our home has ever mentioned it around him. That's what makes this entire experience so chilling and surreal. Let me start at the beginning when I was a little girl. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, I had an imaginary friend named Peter. I always called him Petey. We were inseparable. We played together, laughed together, and I vividly remember feeling safe around him, like he was watching over me. I didn't think much of it at the time, of course. It was just a normal part of childhood. Fast forward to when I was about 10 years old. My mother sat me down and began talking to me about something strange from our past, something I hadn't fully remembered. She told me that my older brother, who would have been around 14 at the time of this conversation, had also talked to Petey when he was younger. But not just Petey. He had 2 other imaginary friends named John and Jack. That was the first time I'd heard of Jack. According to my mom, Jack was different. He was mean, dangerous. My mother was very serious when she explained that Jack would tell us to do terrible things. Things no child should ever even understand, let alone be influenced toward. Things like hurting ourselves, hurting other people, and acts of disturbing violence and abuse. My mom told my brother never to listen to Jack, and to only talk to the good ones, meaning Petey and John. She believed they were trying to protect us. At the time, this conversation seemed bizarre, but was brushed off as some creepy part of childhood imagination. We moved on with life. But years later, many years later, we found out something that changed everything. In 2016, when I was about 20 years old and my brother was 24, we came across disturbing information about the house we grew up in. It turns out it was the site of a horrific crime that happened decades earlier. The house had belonged to a man named Jackson. He had 2 sons, Peter, age 6, and Jonathan, age 13. According to the reports, Jackson had been sexually abusing his sons. Eventually, it culminated in the unthinkable. He murdered both boys and then took his own life inside the house. The names Peter, John, Jack, it all made horrifying sense. My imaginary friend Petey was real. My brother's childhood protectors, Petey and John, were the spirits of 2 murdered children. And Jack? He wasn't imaginary either. He was the lingering malevolence of the man who had destroyed his family. It hit us hard, but in a strange way it also brought clarity. Petey and John had been trying to protect us. Jack had been trying to continue what he started. The pieces all came together. The dark urges, the voices telling us to do harm, the internal conflict we both remembered even if we couldn't always describe it back then. After that, I tried to put it all behind me. I grew up. I had a child, my son, and now here we are. Recently, my son started acting out in ways that were deeply concerning, behavior that seemed far beyond typical tantrums or developmental struggles. He would become extremely aggressive or say things that were far too mature and violent for his age. We started asking questions. When asked why he was doing these things, he responded very plainly. My friend Jack told me to. The moment he said it, my stomach dropped. I asked him who Jack was. And who is Petey? I added casually, hoping he'd say something innocent. That's when it got terrifying. His entire face changed. His lips puckered into an O shape, and his eyes rolled so far back into his head it looked like they were disappearing. Then he clapped his hands over his ears and began to speak. Not yell, but say very loudly, God said I can't talk to you. We were stunned. I gently asked, "Who did God say you can't talk to, honey?" He didn't respond. Instead, he calmly walked away like nothing had happened. He didn't speak another word about it. It was like a switch had flipped, and he had no memory of what just happened. This wasn't like any of his usual stimming behaviors. I've seen every kind of stim my child has. Eye movements, facial gestures, repetitive phrases, but this was something else. I don't believe he's possessed. That's not where my mind immediately goes. But I do believe there's something he's experiencing that goes beyond normal childhood imagination. How could he possibly know the names Jack and Petey? Why would he say them in connection to being told to do bad things? And that face, the sudden change, the eerily loud statement, "God said I can't talk to you." Where did that come from? My son has never heard the stories. We don't talk about that house or what happened there. He wasn't born anywhere near that home. He doesn't even know it existed. So how could he know? It has shaken me to my core. My first instinct is to protect him at all costs. But how do you protect a child from something unseen? From something that might exist in memory or trauma, or perhaps in a space beyond this world? My son still occasionally mentions Petey. He says he plays with him when we're busy. And honestly, I want to believe that Petey is still trying to protect, just like he did for me and my brother. I want to believe that the good spirits, if that's what they are, have returned to shield my son from whatever darkness is trying to creep back in. But the fact that it's all coming full circle, that these names are returning in the same patterns, in the same whispered influences, leaves me with so many unanswered questions. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to stop it. But I know this is real. And I know I'm not the only one who's ever experienced something like this. So please, if this has ever happened to you or anything like it, I'm asking, what do I do now? Because whatever this is, it's not over. This happened during my first year of college, back when I was living in a small, strange town called Sandy Point, Maine. I went to school not far from there and stayed in the dorms during the week, but most weekends I would head back to my parents' house in Sandy Point. It was always a little comfort being home, at least in theory, but that town, that house, let's just say there were things that made it hard to ever feel truly comfortable there. Sandy Point is a tiny place near Bucksport. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the creepiest town I've ever been in. It didn't matter if it was morning, noon, or midnight. It was dead silent. I would go for walks at random times just to get some fresh air or clear my head, and I never saw a single person. No one mowing their lawn, no one taking out the trash, no cars passing, just silence. It gave off a really weird energy, like something was off. Not wrong in an obvious way, just enough to make you uneasy. It felt like the kind of place where time stopped, but no one ever told you. Now, our house wasn't much better. The place was old. Yellow paint that had faded and chipped with time. Apple trees scattered across the front yard. You had to turn off the main road, make a sharp right down a side road, and then another sharp right into the driveway. Just across from it sat a rundown motel on a hill, equally creepy, like something straight out of a horror movie. The kind of place you see and instinctively think, yeah, I'm not staying there. When you walked into the house, you'd come up the stairs and straight into the dining room. The floors were original, old, creaky wood that groaned under every step. The kitchen was straight ahead, and to the right was the staircase going upstairs and the living room, which was always freezing cold, no matter the season. We couldn't explain that. It didn't matter if the rest of the house was warm. You stepped into that living room, and it was like walking into a walk-in freezer. The basement, dirt floor, narrow wooden steps, one dangling light bulb. That place had bad vibes. My mom and I both hated going down there. You could physically feel the air change when you opened that door. It was like you were suddenly being watched by something you couldn't see but knew was there. I would avoid it at all costs. But the weirdest part? My dad was completely unfazed. Never seemed to notice anything off about the house. Never mentioned anything unusual, until one day when he became the one telling us a story that changed everything. Let me back up a little first. There were things that happened to me before that moment, and I brushed them off because I was used to strange dreams or chalked it up to being overtired from school. But now, thinking back, it all lines up. I always laid out my clothes for the next day on a chair in my room. Neatly folded or hung together, shirt, pants, socks, the works. But without fail, I'd wake up and find my clothes all over the house. One sock in the hallway, my shirt on the kitchen table, jeans draped over the staircase railing. It became routine to go on a little scavenger hunt every morning. It was creepy, but I figured I might have moved in my sleep. That's what I wanted to believe. Then there were the footsteps. Almost every night, like clockwork, I'd hear them. Heavy steps coming up the stairs from the first floor. You could hear them move into the hallway, then walk right past my bedroom door. Sometimes they stopped in front of my door. Other times they continued down toward my parents' room and then turned around and came back. It became so familiar that I would casually say hello when I heard it, just to acknowledge whatever it was. And then silence, just the feeling of being watched. Nothing more. But it wasn't until my dad had an experience that I realized something truly unexplainable was going on. This happened on a weekday while I was at school. My dad stayed home sick. He was upstairs in bed, half asleep, when he heard someone walking up the stairs to the front porch. Then he clearly heard the front door open. He called out, thinking it was my mom getting home from work early. No response. Then he heard someone walking across the dining room. At this point, he got out of bed. He called my mom's name again. Nothing. Just those slow, deliberate footsteps. When he got to the top of the stairs, he saw a man, plain as day, walk into the living room. The man had his back turned, wearing overalls and boots. My dad is not the kind of guy to scare easily. He's not a believer in ghosts or anything paranormal. But in that moment, his instincts kicked in. He went straight to the bedroom, grabbed his gun, and started shouting down the stairs that if someone was in the house, they needed to get out immediately or face the consequences. Still nothing. He searched the entire house, every room, the basement, the yard, even around the old apple trees. There was no one there. No doors open, no windows, no sign of anyone having entered or left. And the thing is, my dad doesn't lie about stuff like this, especially not this kind of story. He didn't even tell us right away. He only brought it up a few days later, casually, while sipping coffee like it was no big deal. But the look in his eyes, he was shaken. Not long after that, we moved to Bangor. And honestly, I was relieved. That house, that town, something wasn't right. I don't know what it was exactly, but it wasn't just old house creaks or bad dreams. That place held something. something that never wanted to be seen, but made sure you knew it was there. I still think about that house sometimes. I have a few other stories from there, but maybe I'll save those for another time. For now, I'd really love to hear if anyone else has had anything similar happen, because I still wonder, who was the man in overalls? And why did he never want to leave that cold, empty living room? When my daughter was just 4 months old, we moved into my mother-in-law's home. It felt like the most natural decision at the time. My wife and I were only 21, newly married, and had been living in my best friend's apartment. But once our daughter arrived, it was clear we needed more space, more support, and a more stable environment. My mother-in-law's house had a backyard, a dedicated room for the baby, and the promise of help from a woman who had raised a child on her own after being widowed at a young age. She had bought that house after losing her husband when my wife was just 2 years old. Despite all that loss, she was strong and loving, still working full-time and never missing Sunday Mass. It was a modest but warm home, full of framed photographs, quiet routines, and the kind of lived-in peace that makes you feel protected. At first, everything was calm, but about 6 months into living there, when my daughter was 10 months old, something shifted. She started waking up in the middle of the night screaming, shaking, inconsolable, red-faced with fear. My wife, being a stay-at-home mom at the time, would get up every night to soothe her. But it wasn't easy. These weren't normal baby cries. It took more than an hour each time to calm her down. My wife would rock her, hum lullabies, and hold her close until she finally wore herself out and fell back asleep. After 3 or 4 nights of this, my wife was exhausted. She nudged me in the early hours and asked me to take a turn. That first night I walked into her room. The air felt different. Still, cold. Not like a draft. More like something had settled in the room before I arrived. My daughter was standing up in her crib, tiny fists gripping the bars, crying loudly. But not just crying. She was staring. Her gaze locked onto a particular corner of the room. Her eyes wide with something I can only describe as fear. I picked her up and started rocking her gently, whispering softly. But no matter how I turned or where I walked in the room, she kept looking over my shoulder, toward that same corner. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. She eventually fell asleep in my arms, but the experience left me unsettled. And it wasn't just a one-off thing. It happened again the next night, and the one after that. Same cries, same fear, same fixed gaze toward that corner. But then, after those few nights, something changed again. She still cried, but only to wake us up. By the time I entered the room, she'd be quiet. Not sleeping, not upset, just lying there silently in her crib. Eyes still locked on that same spot in the ceiling corner. I started remembering other things. Back when we were in the apartment during diaper changes on the changing table, she used to look up at the ceiling and babble. Not in the way babies normally do, but in a way that felt interactive, like she was responding to something or someone we couldn't see. And she was always focused on the corner above the table. I didn't know what to make of it. My wife and I were running on fumes, sleep-deprived and puzzled. Eventually, we were 2 weeks into these nightly visits when I brought it up with my mother-in-law. I told her everything. How the baby was waking up crying and looking at that corner, how the fear felt real, and how it kept repeating. I think deep down I hoped she would offer to help with the soothing, or at least offer an explanation. She listened quietly, then nodded once and said something I'll never forget. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll deal with it." My mother-in-law was a devout Catholic. She never missed Mass and held tight to the beliefs and superstitions she brought from her home country. She had this natural calm to her and a way of blending spirituality with simple logic. She believed in the power of prayer, faith, and healing. If you had a headache or a sore back, she'd massage you while murmuring quiet prayers, and somehow you always felt better afterward. The night after our conversation, the crying stopped. Completely. Our daughter didn't wake us up. She didn't cry. She didn't even seem restless. She slept peacefully through the night. And so did we. This continued, night after night. A full week passed without incident. It was like the shadow that had been hanging over the room had lifted. We were relieved, but also confused. Curious. I had to ask. A couple of weeks later, while sitting in the kitchen with my mother-in-law, I asked her what she did. Did she pray? Did she bless the room? What changed? She sipped her tea, smiled faintly, and replied, "I just asked my husband not to visit the baby anymore. He was scaring her. That was it. No ceremony, no incense, no holy water. Just a quiet conversation between the living and the dead." Years went by, and my daughter grew up strong and joyful. My mother-in-law remained the center of our family until she passed away 7 years ago. Watching her deal with her health struggles alone in that house, we decided to move to a bungalow. Fewer stairs for her, and later, for my own arthritic knees. During the pandemic, my now-grown daughter moved back in with us after having her own baby, our grandson. The family room became his little kingdom. We'd change his diapers on the couch or floor, and sometimes, out of nowhere, he would start babbling happily, always toward the same corner of the ceiling. We joked, of course. "He's talking to Grandma," we'd say. But sometimes it didn't feel like a joke. There's something in that room, in that corner, that has passed through generations. My grandson never met his great-grandmother, but he seems drawn to her photographs, like he knows her, like she never really left. I can't explain any of it. I've stopped trying to. All I know is sometimes children see things that we don't. And sometimes, love doesn't end when someone passes on. It just finds a new corner to stand in, watching, waiting, protecting. And if my grandson is really talking to her, I hope she's smiling back. When my grandpa was a young man, he worked for the railroad. It was good, honest work, and he made decent money. He wasn't married yet, so he had few obligations beyond the job. Like a lot of young men at that time, he spent his free weekends hanging out with buddies, cruising around in the nice car he had saved up for. He loved going to dances, meeting people, living a little before settling down. One Friday evening, he was headed to a dance in a neighboring town, and as usual, he was running a little late. The sun was low in the sky, casting long orange shadows over the hills. In a hurry, Grandpa decided to take a shortcut, a winding, curvy back road that twisted its way through the countryside. He was speeding a little, maybe more than he should have been, when he crested a hill and was hit straight in the eyes by the setting sun. Blinded for a moment, he could barely make out what looked like a person standing in the middle of the road. He jerked the wheel to avoid hitting them, lost control, and his car flew off the side of the road into a ravine. The world went dark. The next thing he remembered was a voice, young, urgent, and full of concern. Mister, are ya a light?" Grandpa opened his eyes, his head pounding and his knee burning like fire. He couldn't move much, but he was alive. That voice belonged to a pudgy, pale-faced boy with bright red hair and a hairlip that gave his speech a soft, slurred lisp. The boy helped him out of the wrecked car, dug Grandpa's duffel bag from the back seat, and supported him up the embankment to the roadside. Grandpa noticed an old house set back behind a line of trees and asked the boy if that was where he lived. "Yeah," the boy said, nodding. Even though he was hurting, Grandpa couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. The boy seemed nice enough, kind, helpful, maybe a little odd. Grandpa asked if there was a phone he could use to call for help. "No phone," the boy replied. "Are your folks home?" "Nope. Dunno when they'll be back." "How far to the nearest neighbor?" "Last place you passed, with the long white fence." Grandpa remembered that it had to be 6 miles back. He sighed, knowing he wasn't gonna make it that far on foot with a busted knee. "You can come to my house," the boy offered. With the boy's help, Grandpa limped slowly up the long dirt driveway to the worn, sagging house. It looked like it had seen better days. Paint peeling, shutters missing. Still, it was shelter. Inside, the place was cold. Strangely cold for a warm June evening. There was no sign of heating, no furnace, not even a wood stove. But there was a large hearth in the kitchen. Grandpa shivered and asked, "Is the house always this cold?" "I'm a lose cold," the boy said, rubbing his arms. "Well, if you get me some wood, I'll start a fire," Grandpa offered. The boy nodded and quickly returned with an armful of dry wood. Grandpa got a fire going, and soon the flames were crackling. The boy stood almost uncomfortably close to the fire, soaking in the heat, arms wrapped around himself. Grandpa chuckled softly and said, "You better be careful, buddy. You're gonna get burned." "I'm a lose cold," the boy repeated almost to himself. Grandpa reached into his duffel and offered the boy a sandwich. "You hungry?" The boy shook his head. "Already had supper." Grandpa ate quietly while the boy stood there by the fire. Something about the house made Grandpa uneasy. It didn't look lived in. No pictures, no clutter, no warmth beyond the fire they just built. As night settled in, the boy finally turned to him and said, "You couldn't sleep in my bed. I'll keep the fire going." "That's kind of you," Grandpa said. "You sure no one'll be coming by? I'd hate to miss a chance to get a tow." "Nobody ever comes up this far. They're scared of the ghosts." Grandpa blinked. "Ghosts?" "Yeah," the boy said casually. "People say this house is haunted, but I never seen nothing. Only thing I'm scared of is nightmares." "Nightmares?" "Yep, same one every night. Big ol' hog chases me, tries to eat me, but I always wake up just in time." Grandpa frowned. "You ever get chased by a pig in real life?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, picked up her baby, made it squeal. She didn't like that. Knocked me down and bit me up real bad." Grandpa figured that explained the dreams. Trauma has a way of seeping into sleep. Before long, Grandpa couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. The fire was warm, his body was sore, and the boy insisted he take the bed. "I'll keep watch," the boy said. Grandpa fell asleep quickly, but not for long. He woke with a jolt, sweating, heart pounding. He'd had the exact nightmare the boy had described. A giant sow charging him, tusks flashing, grunting, closing in. He woke just before it reached him. The room was dim, with only glowing embers in the fireplace. The boy still sat silently nearby, staring into the ashes. The sun was just beginning to rise. Grandpa stepped outside, limping toward the edge of the porch to relieve himself. As he stood there, he heard the faint rumble of a tractor in the distance. With effort, he hobbled into the field and waved his arms until the farmer saw him. The man pulled up in his tractor and looked shocked. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," Grandpa said. "Wrecked my car last night. Went off the road just over that hill." The farmer's face changed. "Last night? Where'd you sleep?" Grandpa explained about the boy in the road, the house, the fire, the nightmares. The color drained from the farmer's face. "You slept there?" "Yes, why?" The man shook his head. "I'd heard stories. I never believed them, but I guess I do now." "What stories?" "That boy you met. He died over a year ago, mauled by a sow. It was a horrible thing. Family moved away right after the funeral. Couldn't stand to live there anymore. House has been empty ever since." Grandpa said nothing. He just looked back toward the house, now far behind them, its windows catching the morning light like watching eyes. He never took that road again. You've made it through the hour. The stories are over now, and the night is quiet again. Let the silence soothe you. Whatever followed you from the tales, leave it here. You're safe, you're calm, and you're already drifting deeper into rest. If you enjoyed these stories, consider subscribing to Dark Reddit for more nightly chills. Until next time, sleep well.